Reinhard, you recently wrote an article for the Stellenbosch newspaper, and in it you mentioned this concept of bad faith. What do you mean by bad faith?
Well, Jane, bad faith didn't have, when I wrote it, I referred to Jean-Paul Sartre, who was a philosopher in sort of 1940s, 50s, and he was an atheist, so obviously it wasn't religion, faith I spoke about. But he spoke about the concept about, pretending something you're not. That's bad faith. In a sense, not being honest with yourself.
Yes.
That's bad faith.
Okay. So not really facing yourself for who you really are.
Yeah, I mean, and it can be totally unintentional, so I think a lot of it is unintentional. But we confronted in life, every now and then we have a window into sort of the soul of our life, and it's sometimes scary, but a brave person faces that with courage. A person in Sartre's world that doesn't, ignores it, pretends it's not there, and he would say that's bad faith.
Okay, so how does this tie into the holistic executive coaching that you do?
Well, with holistic, so says the word, so that it's all together. So when I look at the holistic coaching, I look at 4 aspects. I look at the physical environment and person. Is that person physically well? But the environment that person lives in and works in, is that also a good environment? So that's one. The thinking space of that person, is that at a optimum? Is that a healthy thinking concept world? Does that person process their thoughts positively, correctly? And emotionally, that's the third part of it. Working with your emotions. We all have emotions, but dealing with that in an emotionally healthy way. And the last part, and that's the existential part, and we spoke about in the newspaper article about, is a spiritual part, but not necessarily religious, spiritual and existential way, in looking at meaning and the things I spoke about in the assessment.
Okay, so there is an assessment in that article.
Yes.
Assessment.
Yeah,
Tell us more about that.
Sorry, I didn't speak about the assessment in the article, but we attached.
Yes, there's a link to it.
Yes, that's it. But it relates to the article. So in the assessment, there's criteria, or we call them constructs. So a person has a sense of meaning in the existential world, or non-meaning, but in the assessment I called it void. Now, these things, some person would say, well, the opposite of meaning isn't void. That doesn't matter that much. The point is the assessment needs to allow you to reflect. Okay. You can sit with somebody afterwards and say, well, the opposite of meaning to me is not having a good purpose. But it's a starting point, so it has that construct of meaning, void, about loneliness and belonging. These things are existential constructs, courage versus being stuck, and they are not, they're not in a sense, in a cognitive therapy world, people would work with thinking processes, and they would help you and say, okay, help you to think differently, your emotions will change, and you will get rid of underlying stresses and anxieties. But in the existential world, these things are much deeper. They're not just a event. They could be triggered by an event, but it's long-standing issues and construct. There's a construct of bitterness and mercy. You know, imagine somebody being bitter because of something that happened for years.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine the impact on your life. So it's not just in the moment. It's not, you know, like just having a negative thinking. It's part of your inner being, having no meaning, a purpose in life. That is deep existential, spiritual issues that one has to confront in life.
I can see that, and I can see why you say it takes bravery or courage to do that.
Yep.
So you designed this assessment. Tell us a bit more about how you did that.
Well, I designed this over two years, but the history of it is much longer than that. In a previous video this year, I spoke about my father ending his life, you know, and I spoke about that video about, you know, suicide and the stigma about that word. But I realized through many years, and this happened 25, 26 years ago, but through the years in my studies in philosophy, psychology, and in coaching, I've realized that existential issues like meaning has a huge impact. And for him, that was one of the things, you know, retiring. And so he was busy working all his life. Now he's retired, he got retrenched, but he had enough money. That wasn't the issue. But now there's this void about what's my life about. And for the first time, he was really confronted with that. Yes. He couldn't get busy working. And that led to a depression, which led to him ending his life.
Yeah.
These are deep existential issues. And the same things about, you know, we had people filling in the assessment. I was surprised about one, the courage people had, you know, and things like people filled in loneliness. I was amazed at not just one or two there, I mean, quite a couple of people just being, I'm lonely. And imagine, you know, being surrounded by people but still being lonely and the effect that have. So over 2 years I've been writing these constructs, and they're not perfect, they can change, but it gives a starting point to have a conversation with somebody, to move and help them construct a deep spiritual life that's spiritually well. And that part of the holistic assessment, which doesn't have to be religious. I mean, I'm a person of faith. I belong to the Christian faith, and I really try to be true to that. But I have clients who's not, you know, but you can live this spiritual world without being religious. So that is extremely, extremely important.
So is that the way that you use the assessment to help people? You're talking about meaning, purpose, people really confronting where they're at. You know, is that what you're saying, that the purpose of the assessment is, or are there any other ways that you use it to be able to help your clients?
Yeah, with that part, yes, that's what we do. Somebody folds it in, and it becomes a background for a conversation. You know, so the client can then say, I would ask the client, you know, you filled in this, what stood out to you? You know, you can be in the trap where you see, okay, the person scored a lack of gratitude very low, and I would say, hey, let's talk about that. But that's not how we do it. You know, we let the client choose, because for a person, another construct might be much more important, that they scored higher. So I don't want to look at that and say, oh, you scored this, let's talk about this. It's just an opportunity to start a conversation with deep, meaningful things in people's lives. These constructs, they're also, another word for construct is schemas, you know, that helps people deal with these deep-rooted schemas in their life.
Now that makes sense. So I can see what you're saying about it's an holistic approach, and how all of these things pull together, so that when you engage with clients, you engage from a holistic perspective. So Reinhard, what is the best advice that you think you could give people or clients out there at this time?
I think coming back to the article, Jane, to have the courage to reflect honestly with yourself in the moment about short-term issues, but also deep, long-term issues, you know, and speak to people close to you, you know, so friends that you trust, family that you trust, somebody that you can really be open about what's really the deeper things in your life. You know, yes, we need to be fit, and yes, we need to eat well, but in the end, if we don't deal with these deeper constructs, they'll always come back to us. And if you have to see a professional person, then do that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Thanks, Reinhard. Yeah, and I think that over this time, Reinhard, there's a lot of people who are feeling more of a void, you know, feeling more space than they would normally feel. And things that have maybe been buried over years are surfacing. And it's a great opportunity for all of us to be brave and to be courageous, so we can grow and so we can find that meaning and purpose. So thank you so much for your time.
No, it was a pleasure. It's always great to talk about these things. They're important, and if we can encourage people to have that courage, that's awesome.